Okay, so Gary has responded to my last video with what I consider to be the strongest video that he's made so far in this series, exchange, debate, whatever you want to call it, which is entitled Anacontavod and the Fluffy Kittenist. Now, Gary, you've accused me of repeating the same arguments over and over again and sort of begging the question, belaboring the point. And indeed, I have been doing that. And the reason that I've been doing that is because up until now, you have just been dismissing every point I've made and every objection I've raised in a glib and superficial way. And I call this recent video of yours the strongest in the series so far, because you've finally stopped doing that. You've decided to get down to brass tacks and actually explain your views rather than just having a temper tantrum or shouting obscenities at the camera. So, understand, Gary, that when I call this your strongest video in the series, if that sounds a little bit patronizing, well, it should. Because to say that it's the strongest one you've made so far isn't saying much. And I want to make it very, very clear that I haven't conceded either of these points, whether it be the suicide point or the objective versus subjective experience point. I still consider that I'm very much correct and you're very much incorrect, but you have finally you have finally adequately addressed those points rather than just foaming at the mouth. So despite the fact that Anacontavod and the Fluffy Kittenist is your strongest video so far, it still contains a lot of deliberately misleading statements. I know they're deliberate because you're an intelligent fellow, Gary. And I think you employed no less than 5 straw man fallacies against me in that video, such as accusing me of saying that the future will not exist. I never said that. Claiming that you have to defend the idea that suffering is a bad thing. I never claimed that suffering was not a bad thing. What I claimed is that suffering is defined by our choice to some extent. That the way we subjectively interpret our experiences can define them as either pleasurable or painful. Now, that doesn't mean the pain is any less bad. That doesn't mean that suffering is a good thing or that suffering doesn't exist. It just means that to an extent suffering is a choice. You also accused me of saying that the Orthodox Christians do not believe in pain. And Gary, you know that I never said that. And everybody who watched my videos also knows that I didn't say that. So this seems very disingenuous to me, Gary. I don't know what game you're trying to play. These are pathetic straw men fallacies that are obvious. I never said any of those things, Gary. Now, I also want to clear up a few incorrect statements that you made about me. I guess we'll call it a little fact-checking. You said that I used my girlfriend, Oceanavani, against you in this debate. Well, Oceanavani is not my girlfriend. We broke up several years ago. I think you're aware of that. We're still friends, but we're not romantically involved in any way. And, the reason that I brought her into this debate is that I'm grasping at straws to find your soul, Gary. I'm searching desperately for some vestige of humanity in you. And if it seems cynical for me to use emotional arguments in that way, then so be it. But there's no low to which I won't sink to try to help you, Gary. So, mea culpa. Now, Gary, you also said that I'm a liar and dishonest, and because of that, I'm probably a miserable, lonely person, and there's no one close to me in my life. Oh, Gary, okay. I'm not going to divulge a bunch of personal details about myself to disprove that statement, but rest assured, Gary, I'm close to plenty of people in my daily life, and I'd venture to guess that I have more relationships than you do in that respect. So sticks and stones, Gary. I mean, I really don't even see how any of that stuff is constructive or why you would bother throwing it in. I've refrained from making any kind of personal attacks like that against you, and I just, Gary, it's not that you're hurting my feelings or anything. I just find it to be a waste of time. It seems like obfuscation to me. We should be discussing facts here, and you're trying to, throw this childish drama stuff into the mix. It just kind of muddies the waters and makes this debate more difficult to have. But anyway, even though I haven't conceded either of your points, whether it comes to the suicide question or the objective versus subjective experience question, since you have addressed those in a satisfactory way, I consider that you've gained a little ground in this debate, and I'm going to now fall back upon my second front. And I'm going to employ two new arguments, one which I term the rational argument, and the other which we'll call this one the emotional argument. So, Gary, you've remarked several times that evolution is like a Borg. Well, to quote the Borg, resistance is futile. And now I want to get a little bit into the difference between your garden variety anti-natalist and the ethicist. Because for the garden variety anti-natalist, it is enough to simply, to use your term, turn off the Xerox machine. For the creation of new human life. But the ethicist takes it a step further. You want to eliminate the DNA molecule entirely. You want to eliminate all life on Earth. So the rational argument, we'll call this the argument from futility. Let us imagine a scenario in which somehow, some way, without infringing on anyone's rights, like, for example, forcing uncontacted tribes of indigenous people to learn English so that you can indoctrinate them with your philosophy. Let us assume that somehow you have achieved total 100% saturation of acceptance of your philosophy across all cultures and societies on planet Earth. Let's say that every last human being is on board with ethylism. We all agree with you. Well, now we find ourselves having to set about the task of eliminating all life on planet Earth. How would you do that, Gary? Now, it's common knowledge, everyone bandies this fact around, that even if the United States and the Russian Federation were to disgorge their full arsenals of thermonuclear weapons, cockroaches would still survive. Well, what if we were to use some other means to eliminate all life on planet Earth? You mentioned dioxin a lot in your videos. And dioxin does come to mind right away when I try to think of the most aggressively toxic chemical that human beings are capable of producing. It's carcinogenic, it's teratogenic, in other words, it causes birth defects and mutations. And it's fairly cheap and easy to produce and can be produced in massive quantities like we did during the Vietnam War. Well, let's say that all of humanity, standing in unison, undertakes the effort of destroying all life on Earth with dioxin. every last chemical plant on planet Earth just starts cranking out 50-gallon drums of this stuff, just minute by minute, just cranking out tons of it. You still would not be able to eliminate all life on Earth. Perhaps badly damage and mutate it, but not eliminate it entirely. There's an entire class of life forms in our biosphere, Gary, called extremophiles. These are life forms, as the name would suggest, that live in extreme environments, such as Bacillus inferni, which is which literally means in the Latin the bacteria from hell. Bacteria that exist around hot geothermal vents in the deep ocean, in temperatures too high for any other life form to exist. But it's not just them. Tardigrades, aka water bears, come to mind right away. They can survive cosmic radiation. They can survive complete desiccation, in other words, the absence of all moisture, and remain biologically viable for decades, so that when they become wet again, they come back to life. They can even survive the vacuum of space, which means if somehow you were able to crack our planet in half, you still wouldn't kill these things off, and they'd be drifting through the void, waiting until they land somewhere where the conditions are right, that Goldilocks zone that has water and the right amount of heat, and they would be just fine. Not to mention the fact that there are life forms hiding in places we could never possibly discover and reach. We find cave systems all the time that have been isolated from the rest of the biosphere for millions of years in some cases, with unique life forms that have evolved along a separate course of evolution, isolated from the rest of the biosphere for millions of years until they're finally discovered and exposed to the light of day for the first time. How are you going to eliminate all these, Gary? Through what practical means could you destroy the DNA molecule entirely? And even if you were able to achieve this, how do you know that life doesn't exist somewhere else in the observable universe? In order to completely achieve your aim, of eliminating life, you would have to be 100% sure that you got it all. And I think it's impossible to do that. So I'm eagerly awaiting your answer to that question, Gary. How do you solve that problem? And we'll call this the rational argument from futility. So that's the rational argument. Before I move on to the emotional argument, I just want to get in a little brief word about David Benatar, since you and your followers keep throwing David Benatar in my face. Now, this is less of a refutation than it is a joke, but I like jokes. If I were in South Africa, I would probably be an anti-natalist too. So, that's what I have to say to the Benatar stuff. Anyway, let's go ahead and move on to the emotional argument. And here's what it is. So, Gary, you said that if you had me and Anakantavad strapped to a gurney with your instruments of torture, that there's no amount of money we wouldn't pay to avert being tortured. Well, Gary, I consider that you are the one strapped to the gurney being tortured, and it's a self-imposed torture. And through the mental effort that I'm exerting in continuing this debate and making these videos, I consider that I'm paying the price to end your suffering. You said that if you had my family, my sister, my brother, my mother strapped to the torture gurney, I would pay any price to alleviate their suffering. Well, Gary, I consider you a brother, and your suffering is the suffering that I'm trying to alleviate. But since you brought mothers into this, let's talk about yours. You have mentioned in your videos before that both of your parents are still alive. So let's talk about yo mama. Gary, your mother carried you inside of her body for 9 months. And Through all of that, she had to deal with physical discomfort, swollen ankles, morning sickness, violent nausea every time she wakes up. And I don't have to explain to you. I know that you're well aware that pregnancy is a costly undertaking, both mentally, emotionally, and of course physically. Now, I'm forced to wonder, Gary. Does your mother know that you curse your existence, and that you're not grateful for the gift of life that she's given you? I'm sure for the 9 months she carried you inside of her body, she was willing to carry the pregnancy to term and not abort you, because she had the hope that your life might lead you to some kind of happiness and purpose, and that you would be grateful for your life, and clearly you were not. So I want to know, Gary, have you looked your mother in the eye and told her that she screwed you over by bringing you into the world? And how did she react to that? And furthermore, how did her reaction make you feel? Does she even know that you're an ephilist? So this is the emotional argument, Gary. What about your mom? So those are the two arguments that I'm now presenting you with, the rational argument from futility and the emotional argument that you're an ungrateful child. And I'm wondering how many videos it's going to take to get you to adequately address those 2 points. Hopefully it will only take 1 and not 2 or 3. But we'll see. And Gary, you've also expressed a little bit of frustration at the length to which this debate has gone. It seems like you're getting a little bit beleaguered. Well, I hope you're not getting too tired of it yet, Gary, because I'm just getting warmed up. I've conceded nothing so far. I plan on conceding nothing. And even though I'm changing tacks here, I'm in this for the long haul. I'm going to see this through to its conclusion, no matter how long that takes. So, the ball is now firmly back in your court, Gary. I eagerly await your response to my fresh new arguments.